This week on Vaticano, during the recent consistory, Pope Francis announced the canonization date for a young 19th century Italian teenager, Blessed Nunzio Sulprizio. Blessed Nunzio will become a saint on October 14th, together with Pope Paul VI, who proclaimed Nunzio blessed. Take a look inside the Vatican Sewing workshop and learn about the symbolism behind the vestments of the clergy. Walk with us in the footsteps of St. Paul on his second trip to Rome. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. Pope Francis interrupted his summer break to hold an ordinary consistory on July 19th. During the meeting with the College of Cardinals resident in Rome, the Holy Father announced that he'll canonize 5 new saints on October 14th of this year. They're Francesco Spinelli, Vincenzo Romano, Maria Caterina Caspar, Nazaria Ignatia Mach Mesa, and a young Italian, Blessed Nunzio Sulprizio. Blessed Nunzio died at the age of 19 in Naples, Italy in 1836 from bone cancer. Nunzio endured a great deal of pain from his sickness, yet offered this suffering to Jesus, saying he would die to convert even only one sinner. His love for God and the neighbor were heroic, and that's why he's going to be canonized during the Synod of Young People this autumn. Earlier this month, the Cardinal Vicar of Rome, Angelo De Donatis, opened the beatification cause of a young Italian woman, Chiara Corbella, who saved her baby by delaying her own possibly harmful treatment for cancer. Chiara passed away on June 13, 2012, a year after her son Francesco was born. This formal edict, signed on July 2nd, proclaims Corbella a servant of God, recognizing her increasing reputation for holiness and paving the way to sainthood. The new Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, together with Eritrea's President Isaias Afewerki, unexpectedly signed a joint declaration in early July, formally ending the 20-year war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. How will this agreement improve people's lives, and particularly, how will peace affect the life of the Catholic Church there? To answer these questions, we spoke in Rome to Eritrean Father Nunzio Zerai, Nobel Peace Prize nominee in 2015 for his work with migrants. Father Nunzio Zerai, thank you so much for joining us. Now that this peace deal has come about, we were all very surprised that Eritrea and Ethiopia had found a peace agreement. How did you react? Was it a surprise for you too?
Big joy for us, because we dream this day, this peace agreement since these last 20 years. So for us is a big hope for the future.
But you were involved in a certain way in the peace procedure. You were not that surprised because you've been playing quite an important role. Can you tell us about what you have been doing for peace?
I try to discuss with the European Commission and even with the President's office here in Italy before he went to Ethiopia to visit the country. I asked, please, can you try to say something to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia to accept the decision of the United Nations, the resolution about the border issue. That is the key for peace and for our good relation between the two countries.
In these days, after 20 years, the governments of Ethiopia and Eritrea have returned to talk about peace. May the encounter switch on a light of hope for the two countries of the Horn of Africa and for the entire African continent.
How did it feel to hear those words coming from Pope Francis? Did you think that the day would come?
Yes, how you say, Pope Francis, this deal, this relation I hope to become a good example for all our continent, Africa, because we have many conflicts in the continent. The way how to find the solution is a dialogue.
What role did faith, religion, if you want, play in bringing about this change? And how involved was the Holy See? I know you've met Pope Francis on several occasions. What were you asking him, and did it come to fruition?
The religion have a big role, even in this peace deal. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia invite all the religious leaders to involve themselves to prepare the people for reconciliation and for tolerance, for good relation between the neighbor country.
Did the Holy See take initiatives? To what extent was the Holy See involved?
The Holy See is always work since when he started the war in 1998. The Holy See, he used the diplomacy relation with these countries and with other countries to facilitate the dialogue and to find the way for the peace.
You were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015, particularly for your work regarding migration. How much do you think this peace deal will change the migration crisis in your country and in your region of Africa?
So the peace is the base. Now we need to start to build better future for our youth. That means to guarantee for them his fundamental right in the country, to give them freedom, to give them education, healthcare, and job. That is the way we can reduce the exodus of these young people.
5% of Eritreans are Catholic. Can you give us an idea of what it was like for Catholics until today to be Catholic in Eritrea, and how much you hope will be different in the years to come?
Up to now, the Catholic Church is very active church in Eritrea in all aspects of the life, for evangelization, at the same time for the charity, for assistance, for education, healthcare, and all this.
What were the main difficulties that Catholics faced?
For example, some few months ago, the authority he shut down our different activities in healthcare. More than 8 clinics totally closed. That means he can't give a service for the people because it's totally free service for the poor people in that area.
Why did they shut it down?
The authority, he say, is not necessary because we have our service, the state service, so he don't need this other. But
that has nothing to do with Ethiopia, so whether or not there is peace, that doesn't necessarily mean that this will change in your country.
That is our hope is with peace now, maybe even the internal policy he changed, and because up to now our country without constitution, without basic law, so without freedom, without democracy, without all this. Now with peace, I hope the country, the government, he start to build this important infrastructure and structure for the country. Rule of law.
Thank you, Father Musia. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Get ready to take a look at Holy See diplomacy in action. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
At the end of June, here at the UN Geneva, the Caritas Internationalis campaign Share the Journey was presented. Human mobility affects almost every country in the world and has been at the center of a growing global debate. This is part 2 of our report.
Globalization, inclusion, and all these things don't happen in conference rooms. They happen out there somewhere. They happen on the shop floor. They happen in the schoolrooms. They happen in the community centers. They happen in your local groceries or local markets. Here is our front line. It's our front line because the reason, I humbly submit, that we are gathered here today, the reason we are gathered here today is because it is our responsibility to change the narrative.
Your Eminence, in the UN Human Rights Declaration, it states that states need to help to make the conditions in those countries secure, the countries where the refugees are coming from, with the goal that the refugees, can return to home. Isn't that one of the goals?
Yes. In fact, in the Interfaith Declaration that was issued on the, I think the 4th or 5th of May, in the United Nations headquarters in New York, where we participated, it says there that in harmony with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that as a global community, we should also address the situations in countries from where most of the refugees are coming. So it's a global responsibility. Let us address the roots that push people to move away.
It's always the same thing. We're dealing so much with the impact, but we do not look at the root causes, which is really why the impact happens. Otherwise, yes. Okay. So now here's another subject. Many refugees may become immigrants. Well, but this does require legal procedures, applications and so forth, money. Otherwise, they may be, as in the United States, for example, they say the legal terms illegal aliens. Isn't that what so many people in so many Western countries and in the US are afraid of? Illegal aliens that cannot be screened and maybe impose a security threat. Isn't that also one of the reasons why you have this hostility towards the foreigners, towards the people that come?
Yes, we understand that fear, as I said, and with the global events happening now, with all the uncertainty about terrorism that has become really very subtle, etc., we understand the fear. Now, our response is this. One of the recommendations is for the countries, again, not to abandon the legal pathways, to intensify legal pathways, but also pathways that are easier to follow. The faith-based organizations offer our support through our capillary networks of faith communities and organizations engaged in welcoming the stranger for hundreds of years. An experience for hundreds of years.
In 2017, Pope Francis launched the Caritas Internationalis campaign Share the Journey.
Fratelli, non abbiamo paura di condividere il viaggio. Non abbiamo paura. Non abbiamo paura di condividere la speranza.
Why are so many people afraid of refugees or migrants, afraid to share hope?
Maybe we just have to remind everyone that the migrants, the forced migrants, especially the refugees, they take tremendous risks for their families, for their children. I have interviewed many of them. I have heard their stories. Is it too much to ask all of us to share that hope that we also have within us? Can that hope be shared? And can we have a common journey through hope?
Pope Francis reminded all of us that Christ asks us to welcome our migrant and refugee brothers and sisters with arms wide open.
Measure, pin, cut and sew. He who once was a high-fashion tailor is now hard at work behind the Vatican City walls, customizing cardinals, cassocks, and Swiss Guards uniforms. It's been 22 years since Eti Ciccioni has been handcrafting clerical garments.
I enjoy greatly the tailor environment, and this also because I dedicate so many hours to it, but it's never burdensome. I love this work, the way it is carried out.
From a small town in central Italy, Eti started working with a needle and thread when he was 17 years old and began his profession in women's fashion. Initially, he wasn't keen on working as the Vatican's tailor due to its antiquity and an 8-kilo iron, which is more than 16 pounds. But through a series of events and some updates to the equipment, Eti finds himself today customizing Vatican garments for many clerics. With the help of assistant Carmelo Candido and some dedicated hand-stitching and embroidery by seamstresses from his hometown, the job gets done. Contrary to high fashion, the work is repetitive yet prosperous.
The difference is enormous, because the world of high fashion changes continuously, and so there are fast-moving novelties. In the Swiss Guard world, as well as that of cassocks, such as that of a cardinal, we have been doing these things for centuries, and hence things remain the same, changing only in terms of quality.
Eti has made about 50 cardinals' cassocks, which can take up to 4 days to make and costs around $1,500 apiece, each using Italian scarlet silk. He spends some time explaining the fine details of each cassock.
Here we have the mozzetta, the rochette and the cassock. The mozzetta is the symbol of a cardinal, just as the color purple for a bishop. The rochette is used for various functions. This is quite a simple one. Usually it's in lace. And underneath is the cassock, which is made in different colors. In this case of a cardinal, it's red, purple for bishops, and black for ordinary priests, but generally the basis is always the same.
And Eti, as you just explained to me, there's so much symbolism in this costume. The color, the red, representing the blood that a cardinal would shed to defend his faith. And then these buttons, there are 33 buttons, and they represent the age at which Jesus Christ was crucified. After years of creating and altering the church's historical vestments, it not only expanded his professional career, but also his spiritual growth.
Whatever is made, whether for the guards, the vestments of a cardinal, a bishop or simple priests, we need to understand that they symbolize the church. When dressed in a cassock, people recognize that the priest represents the church.
Instead of seeing his work on runways or magazines, Eti witnesses his creations in a different way.
When I go around and see people stopping the priest because he's dressed in a cassock, I say that we've tailored something that draws them to the church. For me, really, this is the important thing. Another thing that I note is the love that goes into making them.
Over the years, Eti has been fortunate enough to meet the popes he's been serving. Pope John Paul II gave Eti and his wife their wedding blessing. Pope Benedict XVI baptized one of his children, and he's met Pope Francis twice. Through his passion for tailoring and love for the church, it's a work like no other. In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now.
Here we are at the finish line of St. Paul's incredible journey through life. I have run the race to the finish. I have fought the good fight. I have kept the faith. This place, known as Acque Selviae, or Tre Fontane, 3 fountains, home to 3 churches, the first of which, Santa Maria Scala Coeli. The church was built over an old oratory where St. Bernard, whilst celebrating the Holy Mass here in 1138, had a vision of souls from purgatory ascending a ladder to heaven and being greeted by the Blessed Mother. Hence the name of the church, Santa Maria Scala Coeli, or Stairway to Heaven, and hence the reason for the staircase into the church. We find ourselves in a very sacred place, in this, the oldest part of this church. Here St. Paul spent his last night on earth. Here Paul was imprisoned the night before being martyred for the faith. What was going through the mind of St. Paul on his last night here on earth? At the end of our lives, there are many thoughts that come to us, how we have lived our lives. And St. Paul's letter to Timothy, written from the prison, gives us some idea. He talks about his life being poured away like a libation. But then he talks about being given the crown of righteousness from the Lord, the righteous judge, on that last day. And that was enough to comfort him. The thought of being with the Lord forever in heaven. It gave him the strength to face the difficulties of today with the thought of being with the Lord forever. And so it was that St. Paul went from this prison cell to the place of his martyrdom. This path took him to his martyrdom. Behind me is the church known as San Paolo alle Tre Fontane, the 3 springs, with that inscription above the door. This is the place of the martyrdom of St. Paul. Together with St. Paul, let us walk the path to martyrdom. This is the altar of St. Paul, the exact place where he was beheaded in the year 67 AD on June the 29th. Indeed, above the altar we see the masterpiece of Paul's beheading, his head then bouncing on 3 spots, water gushing forth. It is said that St. Paul, before his death, prayed for a long time in Hebrew. He then placed his head on the column and so gave glory to God by his martyrdom. Less than 30 years after the death of the Apostle Paul, Pope Clement I confirmed the martyrdom in his letter to the Corinthians. Then we read in the Acts of St. Peter and St. Paul, between the 4th and 5th century, of their respective martyrdoms. They confirm that St. Paul was martyred at this place known as the Aquae Salviae. In the mid-19th century, extensive excavations took place here, and just as those very early texts spoke of Paul being beheaded near a pine tree, pine cones were found here, as well as coins from the time of Emperor Nero. After his death, St. Paul's followers carried his body to the Cella Memoria, the cemetery where he was laid to rest, where now stands the magnificent Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls.